I remember the exact moment everything began to fall apart, though at the time it felt like just another ordinary morning. I was standing in my small backyard, trimming the lavender bushes I had planted years ago. The scent always calmed me. It reminded me that even after everything life had taken from me, I still had something that was mine. Something steady. Then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, and at my age, those rarely brought anything good. But something instinct, maybe, made me wipe my hands on my apron and pick up. Hello? There was silence at first. Then a voice. Mom, it's me. My chest tightened instantly. Ethan. I hadn't heard from my son in weeks. Maybe months, if I was being honest with myself. Our conversations had grown shorter over the years, more distant. Still, hearing his voice like that, shaky, almost breaking, sent a wave of concern straight through me. Ethan? What's wrong? Another pause. Then a quiet, strained breath. I need to see you. Today. Please. Something in his tone made my fingers go cold. Of course, I said quickly. Come over. I'll be here. He hung up without another word. He arrived faster than I expected. About 20 minutes later, I heard a car door slam. When I opened the front door, I saw him standing there, but he didn't look like my son. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Behind him stood his wife, Vanessa. She was always perfectly put together, sharp eyes, polished appearance, the kind of woman who made you feel like she was studying you even when she smiled. Today was no different. If anything, her expression seemed too calm. Hi, Amelia, she said, stepping forward to hug me lightly. Her perfume was strong, overpowering. Ethan didn't hug me at all. He just walked inside like he didn't trust himself to speak. That scared me more than anything. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Ethan used to do his homework, where I had packed his lunches, where I had once believed nothing could ever truly go wrong. Now everything felt different. Tell me, I said gently. Ethan leaned forward, pressing his hands together like he was trying to hold himself together physically. I messed up, he said. Those 3 words hit harder than anything else could have. How bad? I asked quietly. Vanessa answered before he could. Very bad. Her tone was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. Ethan swallowed. I made some investments. I thought they were safe. They weren't. Everything collapsed. My heart started pounding. What does that mean? It means, he said, his voice cracking, we're losing the house. I felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. What? There's debt. A lot of it. Legal notices, deadlines. If we don't pay, they'll take everything. I looked between the two of them, trying to understand. How much? I asked. Vanessa folded her hands neatly on the table. 180,000. The number didn't feel real. It just hung there, heavy. Impossible. That was almost everything I had. Every dollar I had saved over decades. Every sacrifice. Every careful decision. Every no I had said to myself, so I could feel safe in my later years. Gone. In one number. Ethan finally looked at me, and that broke me. Because in his eyes, I didn't see calculation. I saw fear. Real fear. Mom, he whispered, I don't know what to do. And just like that, I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I was thinking about my son, my child, the boy I had raised alone after his father passed, the one person I had built my entire life around. What about the kids? I asked. They don't know, he said quickly. We told them we're just reorganizing things. Vanessa added softly. We're trying to protect them. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. But I ignored it, because I wanted to believe them. There's more, Ethan said. Of course there was. There always is, I replied. He hesitated. Then, we might need a place to stay. Just for a while. Until we fix everything. My house suddenly felt smaller. He grew up here. Every wall held memories. And now they wanted to come back. Not as guests, but as people with nowhere else to go. I should have hesitated. I should have asked questions. I should have taken time to think. But I didn't. Because love doesn't pause for logic. Okay, I said. The relief on Ethan's face was immediate. Overwhelming. He stood up and hugged me tightly, too tightly. Thank you, he kept saying. Thank you, Mom. I held him back, trying to ignore the unease creeping into my chest. Over his shoulder, I looked at Vanessa, and for just a second, her expression changed. It wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was something else. Something colder. Something satisfied. Then it was gone, replaced by that same perfect smile. We'll need to move quickly, she said. Her voice had shifted, more businesslike now. The situation is urgent. Of course it was. It always is when people want something from you. The next few days blurred together. Bank visits. Paperwork. Signatures. So many signatures. I watched my savings disappear like it had never existed. Years of my life reduced to numbers on a screen and then erased. The banker asked if I was sure. My hands were shaking when I said yes. Then came the house. That was harder. Much harder. The lawyer suggested partial ownership, protection, alternatives. I refused all of it, because in my mind, I wasn't losing anything. I was helping my family. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. The day I signed everything over, I felt something strange. Not relief, not even sadness, just a quiet, growing emptiness. Like I had just handed away something I couldn't get back. Something more than money. Something more than a house. That night, I walked through every room alone, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories, telling myself it was still home, that everything would be okay, that this was what love looked like. Sacrifice, trust, family. But deep down, there was a voice, quiet, uncomfortable, persistent, asking one simple question. What if you're wrong? 3 weeks. That's how long it took for my life to completely unravel. At first, everything felt almost normal. Busy, crowded, a little chaotic, but normal enough to convince me I had done the right thing. Ethan and Vanessa moved in quickly, faster than I expected. Within days, the house no longer felt like mine. Their boxes filled every corner. Their routines replaced mine. Their voices echoed through rooms that used to hold only quiet memories. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what family looked like when things got hard. But something was off. Not in a way I could clearly explain, not something I could point to and say this is wrong. It was more like a feeling that settled under my skin and refused to leave. Vanessa ran the house like she had always lived there. She rearranged furniture without asking, replaced things, threw out others. Even small things like my kitchen drawers were suddenly different. I'd open one and not find what I'd been keeping in the same place for years. When I mentioned it, she would just smile and say, I'm helping you modernize. Ethan, he was different too. At first, I thought it was stress. Anyone would be overwhelmed in his situation. But he avoided me. Not completely. He still spoke to me, still thanked me occasionally, but there was distance. A wall. He no longer sat with me in the evenings like he used to when he visited. No more long talks. No more shared silence that felt comfortable. Now everything felt rushed, distracted, like he was always somewhere else in his mind. And the children, they were barely there. I noticed it slowly. At first, I thought they were just staying in their rooms, adjusting like kids do. But then I realized I hadn't heard them in hours. Sometimes entire days passed where I barely saw them. When I asked, Vanessa would say they were at activities at friends' houses, keeping busy. It didn't feel right. But again, I ignored it, because accepting that something was wrong would mean accepting that I had made a mistake. And I wasn't ready for that. The morning everything changed started like any other, except it didn't. I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind I used to enjoy. Not the soft quiet of an early morning. This silence felt heavy.
Wrong.
Like something had been removed. There were no footsteps upstairs. No doors opening. No faint hum of voices. No coffee machine. Nothing. I sat up slowly in bed, my heart already beginning to beat faster for reasons I couldn't yet explain. Ethan? I called out. No answer. I wrapped my robe around me and stepped into the hallway. Still nothing. The house felt empty. I walked downstairs, each step echoing louder than it should have. The air itself felt different. Colder, somehow. Vanessa? I tried again. Silence answered me. When I reached the living room, I stopped. Something was wrong. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything looked neat. Too neat. Cleaner than usual. But then my eyes started catching the details. The picture frames were gone. The small decorations Vanessa had placed around the room, gone. The children's things, backpacks, shoes, jackets, gone. A slow, creeping dread spread through my chest.
No, iwisparat.
I moved faster now, almost running toward the kitchen. And that's when I saw it. A single piece of paper, folded neatly, placed in the center of the table, with my name on it. My hands were already shaking before I even touched it. I didn't want to open it, because some part of me already knew. Still, I unfolded the paper.
And read.
Amelia, thanks for everything. We needed a fresh start, and now we have it. The house has been sold. Don't try to find us. That alone would have been enough to break me. But there was more. At the bottom, a final line. You were always too easy. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was in the chair, the paper still in my hands, my mind refusing to process what my eyes had just read.
Sold.
They sold the house. My house. The house I had lived in for decades. The house I had given them. I read the note again, and again, as if the words might change, as if I had misunderstood. But they didn't. They stayed the same.
Cold.
Final. Cruel. My first instinct was denial. This has to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Maybe they meant something else. Maybe they were coming back. Maybe. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Hello. Good morning, a professional voice said. I'm calling regarding the property transfer. The new owners will be taking possession this Monday. You'll need to vacate by Sunday. Sunday. Today was Friday. You must have the wrong person, I said, my voice barely sounding like mine. Are you Amelia? Yes, but... Then I'm afraid there's no mistake. The sale was finalized yesterday. Yesterday, while I was sleeping under the same roof. While I believed everything was fine. I hung up slowly. The room started to spin. I looked around the kitchen. My kitchen.
No.
Not anymore. I tried calling Ethan. Disconnected. Vanessa. Straight to voicemail. Again. 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 Nothing. It was like they had erased themselves. Like they had planned this down to the last detail. I sat there for hours. Not moving. Not thinking clearly. Just existing in the aftermath of something I still couldn't fully accept.
How?
How could my own son do this? Not just leave. Not just lie. But plan this. Execute it. Look me in the eyes every single day and pretend. A knock at the door broke the silence. I didn't want to answer, but I did. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Carter. She took one look at my face and immediately stepped inside. Amelia, what happened? The words came out slowly, broken, disjointed, but they came. And as I spoke, I watched her expression change. Confusion,
Shock.
anger. That's fraud, she said firmly. But I shook my head.
No.
I signed everything. I gave it to them. And that was the worst part. I wasn't tricked in the legal sense. I was tricked in the human one. What are you going to do? She asked gently. I didn't have an answer. At 68 years old,
No savings.
no home, no family. What do you do? That afternoon, I started packing. Not because I was ready, but because I had no choice. Every item I touched felt heavier than it should have. Each one carried a memory, a piece of a life that no longer existed. I found old photos of Ethan,
Smiling. Happy.
innocent, and I couldn't reconcile that boy with the man who had just destroyed me. By evening, I had 2 suitcases. 40 years of life reduced to that. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at them, trying to understand how everything had changed so completely in just a few days. But deep down, through the shock, through the pain, through the disbelief, something else was beginning to form. Something small, something quiet, but dangerous. A question, not why did they do this, but something else. Something colder, more focused. What exactly had they done? And for the first time since reading that note, I felt something shift inside me. The first night after I left the house, I didn't sleep at all. The motel room smelled like cheap detergent and something older beneath it, something soaked into the walls from years of people passing through, all of them carrying their own quiet disasters. The bed creaked every time I shifted, the air conditioner rattled like it might fall apart at any moment, and the dim yellow light made everything feel temporary, disposable.
Just like me.
I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, still holding that note. You were always too easy. I must have read that line 100 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I was trying to accept that it was true. The next morning came too fast. Reality didn't ease in. It slammed into me. I had no home,
No savings.
no plan. At my age, that combination isn't just inconvenient. It's dangerous. I forced myself to get up, to move, to think. Sitting there would only make it worse. I needed answers, even if I didn't know what questions to ask yet. So I started with the only thing I had left, the truth. I went to a small cafe down the street. I needed coffee, something strong enough to cut through the fog in my head. I sat by the window with my phone, my hands still unsteady, and began searching. The house. My house. I didn't expect to find anything, but I did. And what I found made my stomach drop. There it was. A listing. Photos I didn't recognize, bright, polished, staged to look like something out of a magazine. My furniture rearranged. My memories erased. My home turned into a product. Charming renovated property. Move-in ready. Exceptional value. I almost laughed. Exceptional. The price hit me next. $360,000. I stared at the number until it blurred. They hadn't just sold it. They had profited. After taking everything from me, they walked away with more. But then I noticed something else. A section most people would ignore. Disclosure. Small print. Legal language. Easy to miss unless you were looking for it. And something in me was looking. Structural review pending. Subsurface evaluation recommended. Prior indications of foundational movement. My heart started racing.
No.
That couldn't be right. I leaned closer to the screen, reading every word carefully now. The more I read, the colder I felt, because I knew exactly what that meant. The foundation. I hadn't thought about it in years, but now it came back all at once. 15 years ago, my husband and I had hired an engineer when we noticed cracks in the basement walls. At the time, we thought it was minor. Houses settle after all. But it wasn't minor. The report had been clear. The ground beneath the house was unstable. Fixing it would cost more than the house itself. So we made a decision. We lived with it.
Carefully.
Quietly. We never finished the basement. We avoided certain areas. We monitored it year after year.
And we told Ethan.
He had been there. He had seen the report. He had heard the warnings, which meant he knew. I sat back in my chair, my coffee untouched. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something else. Something colder. More calculated. They didn't just take my house. They took a problem. A massive, expensive problem. And they passed it on to someone else. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization creeping slowly into my mind.
Piece by piece. They had counted on this.
I pulled out the note again. We needed a fresh start.
Of course they did.
And they found the perfect way to get it.
My phone rang.
I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. Hello. Is this Amelia? A woman asked. Yes. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm calling from a real estate firm regarding the property on Linden Street. My heart tightened. Yes, what about it? There was a pause. Then, there's been a complication. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of complication? The new owners conducted a detailed inspection after the purchase. They've discovered significant structural damage that was not fully disclosed. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. They're preparing legal action, she continued. We're trying to contact the sellers, but their numbers are no longer active. Do you have any way of reaching them? I let out a slow breath. No, I said quietly. I don't. Another pause. Ma'am, do you know anything about these issues? That question lingered. Heavy. Dangerous. I could lie. Pretend I knew nothing. Walk away. Let someone else deal with the consequences. But I didn't. I knew about the foundation problems, I said. Silence. I didn't think they would sell the house, I added. And that was the truth. The woman's tone changed slightly. More careful now. Thank you for your honesty. I would strongly recommend that you speak with a lawyer. A lawyer? Of course. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, processing everything, connecting the pieces. The fake urgency, the pressure, the speed of everything. The way Vanessa had pushed the paperwork. The way Ethan avoided details. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. And then another thought hit me. Harder than the rest. What if the debt wasn't real? I felt sick. Actually sick. Because if that was true, then everything, every tear, every word, every moment of fear had been a lie. I went back to the motel that afternoon with one thing on my mind.
Proof. I pulled out every document I had.
Bank statements, copies of transfers, legal papers, anything. I spread them across the small table, organizing them, reading them carefully, and slowly, patterns started to appear. Dates that lined up too perfectly. Transactions that moved too quickly. Names of companies I didn't recognize. One name, in particular, caught my attention. A repair company. I remembered it vaguely. Water damage. A few years ago, Ethan had told me it was urgent. That insurance wouldn't cover everything. That he needed help. I had given him money. Without hesitation. I searched the name. And when the result appeared on the screen, I stopped breathing. The company was registered. 3 years ago. Owner. Vanessa. I stared at it. Not understanding. Not wanting to understand. They hadn't just taken from me once. They had been taking from me for years. Small amounts. Convincing reasons.
Urgent situation.
Always believable. Always emotional. I sat back slowly, my hands trembling, but not from fear this time, from something else. Anger. Real anger. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that doesn't cry. The kind that waits. They thought I was weak. They thought I would accept this. Disappear quietly. Blame myself. They were wrong. For the first time since everything happened, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what they had done. And more importantly, what they had left behind. A trail. And I was going to follow it. I didn't go back to being the woman I was before. That version of me, the one who trusted without question, who believed love was always honest, who thought family meant safety, was gone. I could feel it clearly now, like something had been stripped away, leaving behind something sharper. More aware. More dangerous. For the first time in my life, I stopped reacting and started thinking. The next morning, I didn't waste time. I found a lawyer. Not a big, expensive firm, the kind I once thought only serious people needed, but a small office tucked between a pharmacy and a closed bookstore. The sign was simple. No polished glass.
No marble floors.
Just a name, Laura Bennett. I almost didn't go in. A part of me still whispered that this was pointless, that I had signed everything, that legally I had given them what they wanted. But another voice, new, colder, pushed me forward.
So I walked in.
Laura was younger than I expected. Mid-40s, maybe. Tired eyes, but sharp. The kind of person who had seen enough to stop being surprised by human behavior. She didn't interrupt while I spoke. And I told her everything. Not just what had happened recently, but the years before it. The repairs, the money, the urgency, the emotional pressure. The company in Vanessa's name. The house. The sale. By the time I finished, my throat was dry. Laura leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. Well, she said finally, this is not a simple case. I figured that, I replied. She gave a small, almost humorless smile.
No.
It's worse than that. She began laying it out piece by piece. Not emotionally. Not gently. Just facts. What you're describing, she said, tapping a pen lightly against the desk, is not just financial exploitation. This could qualify as elder abuse, fraud, and possibly conspiracy. The words sounded too big, too heavy, like they belonged to someone else's life. Not mine. But I gave them the money, I said. I signed the house over. Yes, she nodded. That's what makes it complicated. But consent doesn't always mean it was lawful, especially if that consent was obtained through deception.
Deception.
The words settled into me like a weight finding its place. She pulled out a notepad. Let's focus on what we can prove. And that's when things started to shift. The fake company, Vanessa's restoration business, registered under her name, receiving money directly from me, multiple times, over several years. That alone, Laura said, raises serious questions. Then the timeline, the sudden financial crisis. No official foreclosure notices. No legal documentation. No verifiable debt. We'll check public records, she said. If there's a foreclosure, it will exist. If there wasn't, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Then the house. The foundation. The undisclosed damage. Ethan's prior knowledge. This is critical, she said. If they knowingly sold a property with concealed structural issues, that's fraud toward the buyers. And if we connect that to the way they acquired the property from you, she paused, then looked directly at me. This becomes a much bigger case. For the first time since everything began, I felt something close to control. What do we do? I asked. Laura didn't hesitate. We start building a timeline. We gather evidence. And we involve law enforcement. Law enforcement. The words made my chest tighten. This was no longer just a family betrayal. This was something official, irreversible. Are you ready for that? She asked quietly. Do I have a choice? I replied. She held my gaze.
Yes.
You do. And that was the moment that mattered most. Because she was right. I did have a choice. I could walk away, take what little I had left, try to survive quietly.
Pretend none of this had happened. Or
I could face it, all of it, the truth, the consequences, the reality of who my son had become. I'm ready, I said. And I meant it. The next few days were a blur, but not like before. This time, it wasn't chaos. It was direction. Laura helped me organize everything. Every payment, every document, every message. We built a timeline stretching back years. And the more we uncovered,
the worse it became.
The repairs weren't random. They followed a pattern. Always urgent, always emotional, always just believable enough. And the amounts, they added up. Not just thousands, tens of thousands. Money I had never questioned, because I trusted him. But the most disturbing part wasn't the money. It was the intention. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't desperation. This was a system. Meanwhile, Laura began checking records, property filings, debt reports, legal notices. And then one afternoon she called me. Her voice was different, more focused. Amelia, she said, I need you to come in. When I arrived, she didn't waste time. There was no foreclosure. The words didn't register at first. I'm sorry, what? There are no records.
No filings.
No legal proceedings. Nothing. The house was never at risk. I sat there, staring at her, waiting for something else. Some clarification. Some explanation that would make it less final. But there was none. It was all fabricated, she said quietly. And just like that, the last illusion shattered. Every tear, every desperate word, every moment he looked at me and said he needed help.
A lie.
I didn't cry.
Not then.
Not anymore. Because something had replaced the grief.
Clarity.
Laura slid another document across the table. This came in this morning, she said. It was from the buyers, the new owners of the house. They had completed a full structural inspection. I scanned the report quickly, then slower, then again. The conclusion was simple, brutal. The house was unlivable. The foundation had deteriorated beyond repair. The structure was unstable. Fixing it would cost more than rebuilding entirely. I felt a strange sense of detachment reading it, like it wasn't my house anymore, like it never had been. They're filing a lawsuit, Laura said, against Ethan and Vanessa. Of course they were. But that's not all, she added. She turned her screen toward me.
An email.
From a bank. International. They moved the money, she said. My heart skipped. Where? She hesitated, then answered. Costa Rica. The room felt smaller suddenly. They purchased property there, she continued, shortly after selling the house.
Of course they did.
A fresh start. Now it made sense. They hadn't just escaped. They had relocated. With my money. They think they're safe, I said slowly. Laura nodded. For now. There was a pause. Then she leaned forward slightly, and her voice changed. But they made a mistake. I looked at her. What kind of mistake? She tapped the screen. When you move large amounts of money internationally, especially tied to property sales, it gets reviewed. I felt something shift again. They left a trail, I said. Laura gave a small nod. Yes, she said. And now we follow it. For the first time since I lost everything, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. The beginning of a fight. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. By the time we reached this point, I no longer recognized my own life. It had transformed into something that felt less like reality and more like a case file, documents, timelines, evidence, statements. Every conversation I had now was about facts, not feelings. Every memory was being re-examined, not for comfort, but for proof. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. A week after Laura confirmed the money had been moved abroad, everything began accelerating. It started with a phone call. Not from Laura this time. Not from the real estate office. Not from the bank. Amelia, this is Detective Harris with the Financial Crimes Unit. I froze. Even though I had expected this moment, hearing it out loud made it real in a completely different way. Yes, I said carefully. We've been reviewing the case your attorney submitted. I'd like to meet with you to go over some details.
There was no panic in me.
No fear. Just a quiet understanding. This had gone beyond personal betrayal. This was official now. We met that afternoon. The office was plain, functional, nothing dramatic, nothing intimidating. But the seriousness of it settled into me the moment I sat down across from him.
He was calm, direct,
observant, the kind of man who had seen enough lies to recognize patterns instantly.
He didn't waste time.
What your attorney has presented suggests long-term financial manipulation, he said, flipping through a file. We're not just looking at a single incident. I know, I replied. He studied me for a moment. Most people in your position don't see it this clearly. I almost smiled. They made it clear for me. He nodded slightly, then continued. We've also received a complaint from the buyers of the property. Structural fraud. That complicates things in your favor. In my favor? I asked.
Yes.
It establishes a broader pattern. It shows intent. This wasn't desperation. It was strategy. Strategy. That word again.
Cold.
Calculated. Exactly what this had been. And the money? I asked. He flipped another page. We've tracked part of it. International transfer.
Costa Rica.
I already knew, but hearing it confirmed by someone like him made it undeniable. They purchased property there, he added. Yes. Another pause. Then, they're not as safe as they think. That caught my attention. Explain, I said. He leaned back slightly. When large sums of money enter another country, especially tied to property, it triggers financial reviews. If there are irregularities, authorities take interest. I felt it again. That shift. That slow turning of the situation. They lied about the source, I said quietly. He gave a small nod. Most likely. And if that's the case, they've created problems for themselves in more than one country. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just consequences. They contacted you? He asked suddenly. I blinked.
No.
He watched my face carefully. If they do, you need to tell us. That felt like a line being drawn. A clear one. I will, I said. The meeting lasted another hour. Details. Clarifications. Timelines. By the time I left, the case was no longer just something we were building. It was something that was moving. That night, back in the motel, I didn't feel as small as I had before. The room hadn't changed. The circumstances hadn't changed. But something inside me had. I wasn't alone in this anymore. The next few days brought more updates. Laura called frequently now. Each time, her voice carried more momentum. They've frozen accounts, she told me during one call. I sat up straighter. What?
In Costa Rica.
Not all of it, but enough to matter. A strange feeling spread through me. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. They can't access the money? I asked.
Not easily, she replied.
And they won't be able to move it again, without drawing more attention. So the perfect escape wasn't so perfect anymore. Another piece fell into place. But the real turning point came 2 days later. Laura asked me to come into her office again. When I arrived, both she and Detective Harris were there. That alone told me this wasn't just an update. This was something bigger. "They've been located," Harris said. The words landed heavier than I expected. "Where?" I asked. "Costa Rica," he confirmed. "Near San Jose." Of course. They purchased a house under both names. That's how we confirmed it. I let out a slow breath. So they weren't hiding. Not really. They thought distance was enough. "What happens now?" I asked. Harris exchanged a glance with Laura, then answered. "Now things get complicated." Of course they did. "They're under investigation there," he continued, "for financial irregularities tied to the property purchase." So it had already started. "They made errors," Laura added. "Documentation inconsistencies. Unexplained funds. It raised flags." I leaned back in my chair, slowly processing it. "They're being watched," Harris said.
Watched.
"Not free. Not untouchable. Just waiting." "And here?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "We're building a case." There it was.
Clear.
Final. "What kind of case?" I asked, even though I already knew.
Fraud.
Financial exploitation. Possibly more, depending on what else we uncover. The room felt very quiet suddenly, because now, this wasn't just about getting my life back. This was about what they were going to lose. "And if it goes through?" I asked. Harris looked directly at me. "They could face prison time." The words didn't shock me. Not anymore. But they did something else. They forced me to confront a reality I had been avoiding. Ethan. My son. Not just someone who betrayed me. Someone who could go to prison. I looked down at my hands. For a moment, just a moment, I saw him as a child again.
Small.
Laughing. Running through the house that no longer existed. Then the image disappeared, replaced by the man who had looked me in the eyes and lied. "I understand," I said quietly. Harris watched me carefully. "You're allowed to feel conflicted." I nodded. "I do," I said. But it wasn't enough to stop me. That night, I sat alone again. Same motel, same silence. But everything felt different now. They weren't gone. They weren't untouchable. They were cornered. And for the first time since this began, I realized something important. They thought the story had ended the moment they left. They thought I would disappear quietly. They were wrong. This was only the middle. And the ending? The ending was still coming. By the time the call came, I was no longer the same woman who had answered the first one. Back then, I had reacted with fear, with instinct, with love that overrode logic. Now, I listened differently. I thought differently. I didn't trust words, I analyzed them. I didn't believe emotions, I looked for intention. And most importantly, I no longer assumed that the people who called me had my best interests at heart. So when my phone lit up late that night with an international number, I didn't feel panic. I felt anticipation. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Hello." There was a pause. Then, "Mom." My grip on the phone tightened instantly.
Ethan.
For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear his breathing, uneven, strained. Not the confident voice I remembered from weeks ago. Not the rehearsed desperation he had used to convince me to give him everything. This was different. This was real fear. "Ethan," I said calmly. "Mom, please don't hang up," he rushed out.
I'm listening.
Another pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "They told me you're working with lawyers, with the police." So he knew. Of course he did. "Yes," I said. Silence again. Then, "You're trying to ruin us." The words didn't hurt the way they once would have. They just revealed him.
No, irreplaceably.
You did that yourselves. His breathing sharpened. It wasn't supposed to go like this. That line. That exact line. Something about it made everything click into place even more clearly than before. Then how is it supposed to go? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. We were going to fix things, he said finally. We just needed time. Once we were settled here, we were going to help you. Take care of you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. With what money, Ethan? I asked quietly. The money you took from me? That's not fair, he snapped. There it was. The shift. I trusted you. I continued. I gave you everything. And you planned this. It wasn't planned like that, he said quickly. Then explain the company, I said. Silence. Avalon Restoration. I continued. Registered under Vanessa's name. 3 years ago. You used it to take money from me. Again and again. The silence stretched longer this time. Say something, I said. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not desperate anymore. Not emotional. Cold. You don't understand how things work, he said. I felt something inside me settle. This was the truth. Not the version he performed.
This.
Then explain it to me, I said. We needed capital, he said flatly. We needed a way out. You had money sitting there doing nothing. Doing nothing. That was my life savings, I said. And now it's an investment, he replied. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to fully absorb what he had just said. You're not even sorry, I said quietly. Another pause. Then, no, he said. That word echoed louder than anything else in the conversation. I'm sorry it turned out like this, he added, but not for what we did. And just like that, any last piece of doubt disappeared. What do you want, Ethan? I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. Stop this, he said. Call your lawyer. Call the police. End it. Of course. They're talking about extradition, he continued. Do you understand what that means? Prison. Years. The kids, Emma and Jake, they'll have no one. There it was. The final card. Not guilt. Not apology. Manipulation. You should have thought about that before, I said calmly. We didn't think it would go this far, he snapped. I did, I replied. That stopped him. What? He asked. I thought about consequences before I gave you everything, I said. I trusted you anyway. Silence. Then his voice dropped again. Lower. Sharper. You're really going to do this? He asked. Yes. You're going to destroy your own family? I leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling. You destroyed this family, I said. The moment you decided I was just a resource. That's not true. It is. I cut in. And you just proved it. Another long silence. Then, you can't prove everything, he said. I almost smiled. I don't have to prove everything, I replied. I just have to prove enough. His breathing grew heavier. Faster. You don't know what you're doing, he said. No, I said. You don't. And then, I ended the call. I didn't wait for another word. Didn't give him the chance to say anything else. I just hung up. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. Not empty. Not heavy. Final. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. That was the moment. The exact moment everything shifted completely. Because until then, some small part of me had still seen him as my son. Now, I saw him clearly. Not as the boy I raised. Not as the man I hoped he would become. But as exactly who he was. And once you see someone like that, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I called Laura. I'm not accepting any settlement, I said. She didn't sound surprised. Are you sure? She asked. Yes. There's no going back after this. I know. A pause. Then we move forward, she said. And that was it. The line had been crossed. No more hesitation. No more doubt. Whatever happened next would happen. But one thing was certain now. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. And I wasn't going to disappear quietly. 18 months later, I stood in my new kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that finally tasted like something again. For a long time, even the simplest things had felt dull. Food, light, conversations, everything had lost its color. But now, standing there in the quiet morning, sunlight slipping through the curtains, I realized something had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just steadily. I was still here, and somehow that mattered more than anything I had lost. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway, a garden just big enough for a few flowers. Nothing like the place I used to have. No history built into the walls. No decades of memories layered into every corner. But it was mine. Not given. Not shared. Not taken. Earned back.
Piece by piece.
The legal process had been long. Exhausting. Relentless. There were days I wanted to walk away. Days I wished I had accepted the settlement, taken what I could, and disappeared into whatever quiet life was still possible. But every time that thought came, something else followed it. That note. You were always too easy. And I refused to let that be the final truth about me. Ethan and Vanessa were extradited. The process took months, but in the end, the evidence was too strong, too detailed, too undeniable to ignore. Every transaction, every false company, every fabricated emergency, it all formed a pattern that no lawyer could explain away. The courtroom was smaller than I expected.
Cold.
Neutral. Unforgiving. The first time I saw Ethan there, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, but because something was missing. The confidence, the control, the certainty that had defined him in our last conversation. It was gone. For a brief moment, our eyes met. And in that moment, I searched for something. Regret.
Shame.
Anything. But I didn't find it. What I saw instead was something else. Resentment. As if I had done this to him. I looked away first. Not out of weakness, but because I no longer needed anything from him. The trial itself was straightforward. Painful, yes, but clear. The evidence spoke louder than emotions ever could. The fake business, the financial trail, the lies about debt, the structural damage to the house. Everything connected. Everything pointed to intent. And in the end, the outcome was exactly what it had been building toward from the very beginning. Ethan was sentenced to 7 years. Vanessa received 5. The judge spoke about betrayal.
About trust.
About the specific cruelty of exploiting someone who had given everything without question. I listened, but the words didn't feel like justice. Not entirely. Because no sentence could restore what had been broken. Not really. The money came back. Most of it. Through asset seizure, legal recovery, forced liquidation of everything they had tried to build with what they took from me. Enough for this house. Enough for stability. Enough to live without fear again. But money doesn't rebuild trust. It doesn't rewrite memory. It doesn't give you back the person you thought your child was. And that was the part no one talks about. The quiet aftermath. When the case is over. When the calls stop. When the paperwork is done. And you're left alone with what remains. The hardest moment didn't happen in court. It didn't happen when I read the sentence. It didn't even happen when I lost my house. It happened 2 months later. When my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Old habit. But something told me to. Hello. There was hesitation on the other end. Then, Grandma? My heart stopped. Emma? I whispered. Her voice was older, stronger, but still hers. I hope it's okay I called, she said quickly. Of course it is, I replied, sitting down without realizing it. There was a pause. A heavy one. I know what happened, she said.
Of course she did.
They told us everything, she continued. The social workers. The lawyers. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I said quietly.
For what? She asked.
For everything, I replied. Another pause. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. Those words hit harder than anything else had, because I hadn't heard them before. Not from anyone who mattered. They said you could have taken us, she added, that you had the option. There it was, the question I had been avoiding. I wanted to, I said honestly, but I couldn't give you the life you deserved. Not then. Silence. We wouldn't have cared, she said softly. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I know, I replied, but I did. We talked for a long time after that, about small things, about her life, about school, about how she and her brother were adjusting. They were okay, more than okay. They were adapting, growing, becoming something beyond what had happened to them. And that was enough. Before we hung up, she said something that stayed with me. I don't think you lost everything, she said. I didn't answer right away. Why not? I asked. Because you're still you, she said. And that's the part they couldn't take. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, thinking about that. For so long, I had measured loss in tangible things. Money, a house, security. But she was right. The most important thing was the one thing they failed to take. Me. That evening, I went into the garden. The roses I had planted months ago were blooming.
Strong, bright, alive.
Just like they had in the old house. Different place.
Same roots.
And maybe that was the lesson in all of this. You can lose everything that surrounds you, everything you built, everything you trusted. But if you survive it, if you rebuild, if you refuse to disappear, then you didn't really lose. You changed. And sometimes that's the only way to truly start over. I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and turned off the lights one by one. Not because I was afraid of the dark, but because, for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of anything anymore.